Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Boss Says We Can't Drive the Work Truck, So We Don't. The title pretty much sums it up, but a long time ago, in a city not far away, I had a terrible summer job. Right after high school, my friend and I were looking for practically anything to make money, and his older brother told us about a job he once had working for this guy washing windows. Now, this guy owns what appears to be a semi-legitimate business. He has a full shop, garage where he stores cleaning products, big fancy tubs that use sonic waves to wash blinds in, and a new, at the time, work truck. He's also a hardcore penny pincher and buys the cheapest, crappiest insurance he can on the truck. Initially, when we got hired on, he would meet us at the shop at 7 a.m, give us the work orders and ride out with us for on-the-job training. After a couple of weeks, he would just leave the work orders in his office and then leave us to our own devices. Now, I want to preface with, we weren't lazy. We got paid hourly, like $9 per hour, but we commissioned based on the hash of individual windows we cleaned in a day and how many windows required a ladder. Those paid an extra 50 cents each. So if we knocked out 3 to 4 jobs in one day, we could take home approximately $14 minus 15 per hours. Another important fact is that this was right after high school, so we were both 18, and for whatever reason, the boss didn't bother to ask or check our hiring paperwork to confirm this. Well, after a month or so, he finds out how old we are and has a come apart. Turns out his insurance on his truck has a clause that anyone driving has to be at least 25 years old with a clean driving record, no DUIs or anything like that, or his monthly payment triples. So he makes it very clear to us that we are not to drive the truck, and if he finds out we're doing it anyway, he'll fire us and dock any bonus pay from our final checks. Legally, he can do that because it's bonus, not hourly. I need to drive home the fact that he was so goddamn delusional that he never paid attention to anything. So one day we come into the shop and see a stack of about 15 jobs. However, he didn't schedule anyone else, never actually scheduled himself, because he expected the shop to just run itself, except for the two of us that day. Cue malicious compliance. He liked to micromanage, but simultaneously never picked up his phone if we called him. So despite calling him numerous times to let him know we can't do anything, we end up just sitting in the shop and listening to the radio for most of the day. This was also only a year or two after smartphones came out, so things like streaming music, movies, or playing games on your phone was essentially non-existent unless you had a spare $1,000 lying around to buy the fancy new iPhone 2. Fast forward about 5 hours and he calls one of us to ask how things are going, how many jobs we'd finished, and if we needed help to get any completed. We explained that we'd been sitting in the shop all day waiting for him to come in so we could get started. Well, at this point he goes ducking ballistic and starts just tearing us up one side and down the other about wasting his time, money, and blah blah blah. Why didn't you call me? Who else is there? Has anyone finished any of the jobs? Needless to say, that was our last day there, but we threatened to report him if he didn't pay us for the time we sat in the shop that day, so we still got paid almost a full day's wages, and from what I heard, within a year or so later his shop folded, so win-win, I guess. The next one is titled, Boss Told Me to Train a Replacement, So I Did. This happened a few years ago and was reminded of it when reading a post here recently. After college, I got a job at a construction delivery company. I worked in a warehouse as the night supervisor. My main job was with loading trucks and making sure they were not too heavy and had routes that were easy to manage. It wasn't a big operation, 6 drivers, but they made a lot of money and were expanding fast. I got it running as efficiently as possible. I was able to expand and get another driver, and the corporate people loved me. Drivers were very particular about routes and stops, and I was able to work around it and make sure everything ran smooth. There was one in particular that always complained about it. Depending on my mood, I would take it or tell him to do the best he could. I want the best supervisor. I should have been more assertive, but I did the best I could with what I was given. My wife is in the military and she got orders to move overseas. I have them a huge heads up of when we would be leaving and have a 4-week notice. The people we had on staff were almost all hired from temp companies, and they are not the greatest employees. I think only me, the day supervisor and the warehouse manager were the only ones that were directly hired. I told the warehouse manager so many times to hire someone outside for the job and not to hire within. I was clear that the people we had were good drivers but would not make good supervisors. One of the drivers, we will call him Richard, was our newest driver and who the manager planned to replace me. He had a huge anger problem, was late, and called out on a few occasions. I was clear that he would not do well in this role. He told me it was not my job to pick my replacement and that all I should do was train him to take over my position. Malicious compliance, I did just that. I showed him everything I did. I explained the driver's temperament to their routes and showed him how to check the weight of vehicles. Well, I left. Got a nice vacation at home with my kids overseas and got a job as a teacher at the local school, what my degree was really in. 2 years later I came back to visit my mum and decided to have lunch with my old boss. Let's just say Richard lasted less than 2 months. He did a lot wrong and it was an act of God that they finally died him. It started out okay. But soon the deliveries were going out late. The drivers were constantly shuttering with him and he would yell at them. He crashed a truck taking a load out and refused to get a drug test, which is a termination offense. He was threatening drivers, trekking them he had a gun in his car. He grabbed a female dock worker. Finally, he punched a driver, left, and never came back, taking with him the company phone issued to him. The warehouse lost a ton of business because of this as deliveries were late, then being refused, and job sites started ordering from competitors. I ducking knew it. My boss was only not fired because he found another job and quit before they could get rid of him. They ended up replacing Richard with another internal promotion and that guy was fired for coming in drunk. Maybe sometimes people should listen to their lower employees' input. The next one is titled, "You Are Too Important to Take the First Aid Class? Have fun failing the test." This happened in 2018. My husband and I own a company that works with companies to provide doctors and nurses for factories and construction, OSHA and First Aid training and some other things. One of our major accounts is a power company. We not only provide on-site personnel, but also train them on first aid. This particular company is very strict on their health and safety protocols. They require all their crews to have an up-to-date first aid certificate and they had shelled a decent amount of money to equip each of their sites, including their offices, with 2 AEDs, automated external defibrillator. We were also required to provide an adjusted training for their staff and crews. Because of the nature of the job, we trained them in 3 hours, 2 days schedule. 1 day was theory, because in a factory environment, instead of ABC, UEABC equals environment, airway, breathing, circulation, with a written test at the end, and the next day was practical exam. We were scheduled for a 2-day training with this company. We were told it would be a small class, around 40 people, so I booked myself and our senior trainer. We arrived for the training, set up, get the roll call, and there was when it happened. Cast, John equals our senior trainer, Karen equals very important person, Whack equals me, Chad equals COO. As I said, this company is very hardcore on their health and safety. Except from the crews, they require every person that has even the slightest chance of visiting a power plant to have a current first aid certificate. This means we trained a lot of suits. As the room is filling up, I notice John talking with a woman I didn't know. The conversation is heated and I approach to see what's happening. Whack, is everything okay? Karen, no, it's not. As I was saying to this man, I don't need to take the class. I did first aid in my previous company and I have very important work to do. John, as I explained, madam, we follow the company policies about training. Karen, but I already know everything. Whack, madam, your manager booked you for the class. He probably thinks it's more important than anything else. Karen, no. I'm very high in the company. If you don't release me immediately, you may lose your contract. At that point, she looked at us with crossed arms and a smug face. John, being a no-nonsense former trainer for the Army's Medic Corps, was ready to explode. Cue malicious compliance. There was a rule for the training, set by the company, that any personnel that could provide an up-to-date certificate could sign a waiver for the in-person training, but they had to take the test. I quickly provided this as an option to Karen. She wasn't completely happy, but she took it. I explained there were 2 tests, one in writing, one practical. She said fine and to notify her when it was time to take them. So, 2.5 hours later, she is sitting to take the written test. Immediately, I can see she is struggling, since most of the questions are tailored for an industrial setting. The test ends and we collect the papers. At a quick glance, I knew she had, at best, passed with a very low grade. Despite her struggling in theory, she just came for the test the next day. In this case, I knew she was going to fail. Along with their normal CPR, we had added an AED training per company rules, and despite being a fairly easy and straightforward machine to use, she had serious trouble. So, we pack up, go back to base. We rate the tests, and as expected she was the only who had failed both spectacularly. From the rest 39 people, only one had failed the written test. We sent the results and certificates to the company. Aftermath, Monday morning, just after we opened, I got a call from Chad, the company's COO. He is one of our major contacts, because training was part of his responsibilities. The call went like this: Chad, good morning Whack. I'm calling about the results of the training. Whack, good morning Chad. I had a feeling you would call. Chad, can you tell me why my assistant COO failed? Whack, is Karen your assistant? Chad, yes. Whack, well, she said she had very important work to do and already had a certificate and she signed the waiver. Chad, of course she did. I could hear the frustration in her voice. Chad, can we arrange a quick training for today? I want you to do it. Whack, let me check. It has to be a late one, otherwise tomorrow at 10. Chad, after some thinking, tomorrow then. See you at the office. The next day rolls up and at 10 sharp I'm at the offices. I'm led to a conference room, glass all around and told to wait. A few minutes later, Chad and Karen step into the room. She looked chastised. She sat across me, while Chad stood. Chad asked for the waiver, which I handed to him. He took a look at it and gave it back. Chad, as I explained when you were hired, you had to pass this training. The certificate you gave us was coming up and you came from a different field. Now, do the training properly and pass it. It is one of the prerequisites for the job. Karen took the training properly this time and passed. Since then, she has never complained about first aid training again. The next one is titled, I let the new employee fail. I worked in a pharmacy dedicated to sending medications to nursing homes. Since this is often difficult to do just by hand, there were machines that could help out. I often helped use the machines to package the meds. A new coworker joined my team. She was pleasant enough, but for some reason, I could not tell you, even to this day, I hated her on site. Apparently the feeling was mutual, though we were able to work together cordially enough. Since the machines, while super useful, were also prone to breaking down, a lot of manual intervention was required to ensure smooth operation. Since it's a pharmacy, we also had to keep track of the medications being used on it, which means counts, often done nightly, particularly with more expensive medications. This information is relevant. I had been at this job for a few years, so I was reasonably experienced with the use and maintenance of the machines. My coworker wasn't. This is also where I point out that my coworker is older than me. So, my coworker had been at the job a few weeks and had received some training, so my boss at the time told me that it'd be okay for her to shadow me while I worked, but also to make sure she did some of the work on her own, so she'd learn via hands-on experience. This also meant I couldn't leave until my coworker did, since she hadn't been given the go-ahead to be alone with the machine. Goody. It went more or less okay for the majority of the shift. I let my coworker do some of the work, as ordered by my supervisor, and she seemed to be getting it. However, for some reason, she wasn't relying on the computer, which had kept track of all the medications used, and their corresponding slots, to do the nightly count. Instead, she was literally writing down every single slot and medication by hand, to count later. Coworker, I said, you know the computer keeps track of that. I know it does, yarn and metal, but I don't seem to get how to do it. This is toward the end of the shift. My nerves were fried from having to deal with her, and I was tired. You do it like this, coworker. Shows her, I don't get it, yarn and metal, so I'm just going to do it by hand. You younger people don't seem to have a problem with computers, but I do. Let me do it by myself. People. The process to see what had been used was literally 2 clicks of a mouse button. I had shown her once at the start of our shift. Our supervisor had shown her during initial training. Another coworker had shown her while she was training. I was done. So, I let her do exactly what she wanted. I let her write down every canister by hand, every med by hand, and let her count by hand. I even offered, as a show of good faith, to help with the counting, but again, no, yarn and metal, I'll do it. Let me do it by myself. Fine. As a result, we ended up leaving an hour after our shifts were supposed to end. That's an hour of OT that we hadn't been authorized to take, for the record. The next day, my supervisor asks me why I'd stayed so late last night, so I told her very honestly that my coworker didn't want my help finishing out the necessary counts last night. My supervisor, being what she was, yes, my wording there is deliberate, immediately went and ripped my coworker a new one. The day after, my coworker didn't come in. We all found out she'd quit, effective immediately. Good riddance, I guess. Bonus aftermath, I also found out the day after I had to stay so late that the counts my coworker did were wrong. All of them. The last one is titled, Ace the Final, and our missing work will be waived. Count me in. This was many years ago when I was in high school, but it is still one of my proudest academic coups. Backstory, I was a gifted kid in an IB International Baccalaureate program. I also had undiagnosed ADHD and tested well but didn't consistently complete homework, especially if it was busy work. I'm in IB history class in my sophomore year. We get assigned pages upon pages of reading and notes for homework every night, and the notes are the most tedious bullshit. There's a really specific format we have to use that involves splitting the page in half, writing a fact from the text on one side, a couple of sentences of analysis of that fact on the other, and 2 to 3 sentences summarizing everything you've written at the bottom of the page. We also had quotas for how many pages of notes we had to do. I don't remember the exact ratio because I never ever hit it, but it was like a 40-page reading needed 20 pages of notes. They took forever, there often weren't actually enough key facts to analyze, and everyone bullshitted the duck out of them to hit their page count. They were also the first thing on the chopping block if we had too much homework, which we always did. And we would get graded down for not hitting the quota, not following the format, or for having poor quality content. Everyone hated them with a passion, especially me. Our teacher got sick of people Bsing their notes, witching about their notes, or just not turning them in at all, which happened more often than not. So, she announced at the beginning of the new term that anyone who missed a notes assignment would get an incomplete instead of a 0, so it wouldn't affect your grade, and if you did well on the final, any missing assignments would be waived. But if we didn't do well, they would become zeros, and our grade would drop. She intended this to just be temporary grace for the good students, so they could afford to miss an assignment here and there and not ruin their GPA. But she was not prepared for the unintended consequences I was about to inflict. This announcement was absolute music to my ears. You see, not only were our notes busy work, but they were pointless busy work because all the material from the reading would be covered on the PowerPoint in class the next day. So, I would always just pay attention and take notes in class, only do some of my homework, ace the final because I had still learned the material, and because homework was only 35% of the overall grade, I'd still usually scrape a B in the class, which was fine by me. So, naturally, when I hear we don't have to do notes, I accept the duck out of that challenge. I decided right then and there that I would be doing no history homework for the entire term and basked in my newfound liberation from hours of bullshit. About halfway through the term, my teacher comes up to me and the convo goes something like this: "Teacher," valley girl voice, she was only 24 and very immature, "Ginger, I noticed you haven't turned in any notes at all yet this term." I'm like, kinda concerned about that. Me, well, you said if we did well on the final we would get our notes waived. Teacher, well, I mean yeah, but if you don't do well, you're going to lose a huge chunk of your grade. Me, okay, and? Teacher, bothered, I mean, you should really turn in some notes so that doesn't happen. Me, it's okay, I'm good. Teacher, really bothered, are you seriously planning on, like, just not doing any notes all term? Me, yep. because they'll be waived anyway when I do well on the final. Teacher, getting condescending. Okay, well don't blame me when your grade goes down. Me, yeah. Can I get back to work now? I proceed to stick to my word and not do any notes assignments all term. The final comes around, and it's our typical format, 120 minutes to write 2 essays chosen from 3 prompts. I could have crushed any of them, but I picked the 2 easiest for me and got to writing. I finished the first one about Columbus's problematic historiography and realized it only filled 1 piece of notebook paper front and back, single-spaced. But I had said everything I needed to fulfill the prompt. Cool, on to the next one. I don't remember the topic, but it too was clear and concise, taking up only a sheet and a half. I was the first one done, not unusual for me. I often hyper-focus on essay tests, and walked up to turn it in. The teacher thought I had a question. I informed her I was done. Her eyebrows shot through the roof, and she asked if I was sure. I said yes, left class, and went and enjoyed my early lunch. It's next week, and we get our graded finals back. She stiffly marches up to my desk and slams my test papers down. The longer essay got a 98. The page-long one about Columbus got 100. She muttered something sarcastic about, well, I guess that little gamble paid off for you, huh? Yep, just like I said it would, I said. She was fuming as she walked away. She had been so hoping to catch me in a big gotcha, but as it was, I ended up getting the highest score in the class. She had to waive every single notes assignment, and I ended up with an A for the term. Thanks for listening.